Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for yet another session of the Technical Empowerment Series, where we bring you vendors from the SADA side that are doing phenomenal things on Google Cloud. Today, I want to introduce you to our very special guest, the International CTO for Silk.us, a data platform. Tom, how are you?
I am fantastic, Fabian, and great to speak with you again. And thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, as we get started, why don't you give us a little bit of background, where you've come from, how that knowledge and skill set that you've built over the last couple of years, or the entire trajectory of your career, has taken you to this place here at Silk, and what it is that you're providing for your customers, what it is, the vision that you have, etc.
Certainly, Fabian. So, straight out of university, I started working for companies that have delivered large database application environments to customer environments. So, people that have critical workloads such as hospitals, fire departments, governments, banks, all those type of organizations. So, I've always been heavily involved in architecting solutions, building solutions, overcoming problems for key customer applications, and doing so by building solutions out of infrastructure, but always focused on delivering the performance and the scale needed by enterprise applications.
So, what kind of problems do you typically see when a database cannot perform as expected, right? I mean, it operates well, it houses the data, there's no corruption, but it can't meet the demand.
So the typical business impact of a poorly performing database environment is really on the application. So what you'll find is the application is not scaling, it's not supporting enough customers, and as more customers or more workload is added, the response time gets worse, and as it tends to hit the limits, it becomes exponentially worse. So you can be having a system that's running quite happily with 1,000 or 10,000 operations happening an hour, and you put in another 10%, and rather than a response time of a quarter of a second, it suddenly goes up to 10 seconds. It becomes unusable. So it can exhibit itself in a number of ways. It can be the individual transactions taking a longer time, or overnight operations, batch jobs, or reporting environments taking 50% longer to complete. You see all these type of impact that really cause an issue to the business that's being supported by these mission critical systems.
So, I've been in the industry for maybe the better part of 2 decades. And one of the most interesting things is when I was on premises, I used to see, it's like you just go back your database into an environment that the faster performing it is, the better performance you're going to get. The more critical the workload, the more features and capabilities that you have. And over probably the last 10 years, you've been seeing initially what was a slow adoption to move into cloud, right? And over the last 3 to 5 years, you've seen this massive adoption of cloud where now it's become kind of an extension to everybody's data center. And some companies have just said, we're completely foregoing the data center. We're going to go 100% cloud. SADA Systems, is 100% dedicated to Google Cloud. We've been riding this Google Cloud wave where we're seeing a massive amount of customers just onboarding and consuming Google Cloud. But one of the very interesting things is that just because you had these massive demands for performance, for throughput in the data center, they don't magically get resolved in cloud, right? You actually have to architect them in to make sure that you use your cloud as a foundation. And then that foundation is where you're going to try to accelerate performance. And this is for me where Silk really begins to outline how you transition that on-premises workload to Google Cloud for these structured workloads. So let me take this as the moment to introduce and let you speak about Silk and what it does and the power that's behind it.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more, Fabian. What we're seeing is people have moved all their easy workloads, the more modern applications, the more modern platforms that are happily running in the cloud. and they're making that decision to commit and go all in, and they're finding that the environments that are left are the not just the big ones, not the high performance ones, but perhaps the most mission critical ones, or the ones that are critical to their business. And they're perhaps the ones that have been there for a longer period of time and will become more difficult to re-architect. And it's these workloads that Silk helps for the most. So what Silk does is we provide a database virtualization platform that sits between the infrastructure in the cloud and the database layer. So we do a number of things. So we aggregate the infrastructure that's natively in the cloud. We can deliver extreme levels of performance. We can really deliver the agility, the ability to scale up and down that the cloud promises, but we can do it for workloads and applications and databases that are not cloud native, they're not cloud friendly, and we can do it without having to re-platform, refactor, re-architect, retire, any of those things. We can simply rehost these more enterprise type database workloads. So I'm thinking of the relational databases, the big analytic databases that sit on the database platforms that rely on atomic sort of capabilities, things like SQL, large SQL instances, any of the big database platforms. And because our architecture is delivering these levels of performance and scale, we can do it in a way that's very cost efficient, not just cost efficient in terms of the cost of the cloud resources, but also cost efficient in terms of the database licensing.
That's fantastic. I mean, I get excited because the first time I heard about Silk, the numbers, right? The numbers were just blew me away. Being an infrastructure architect in Google Cloud, I'm one of those type of people that's constantly paying attention to performance and features and capabilities, right? Because they are what ultimately allow you to move a workload. So I'm gonna start here because there's some phenomenal things that you said, Tom. I'm gonna highlight 3 of them that I think are fantastic. One of them is the whole business continuity component of moving your data. The second one is performance. And then the third one is the capabilities that you bring when you have these databases. So I'm not going to start in that order. The first one I'm going to ask you to talk about is performance. Talk about Silk's performance. I mean, the numbers. Give us that information. That's what's exciting.
So what we enable you to deliver is pretty much unlimited levels of performance. We're only limited by the physical infrastructure that underpins the cloud. And fortunately, in Google Cloud, you have some very low latency networking, some very high performance virtual machines, and we can enable you to saturate that infrastructure. So as the Google Cloud layer gets faster, the Silk platform automatically gets faster as well. So we can see database environments. We've just worked on a SQL database environment that was running on the fastest on-premise hardware that they could purchase with direct attached dedicated NVMe data arrays, and we were able to move that into the cloud. And compared to any of the native offerings, we were the only way that they could move these large SQL databases into the cloud and deliver a higher level of performance than they were seeing on-premise, whilst at the same time reducing the overall TCO of moving that workload. And not just because of the license saving, actually the whole cloud cost, including the Silk licensing, was lower than a native data platform.
That's pretty fascinating, right? Because you're getting performance, you're getting the need that you have, right? You're meeting that on-premises demand on Google Cloud. And then on top of that, you're also reducing the total cost of ownership of having your databases running in Google Cloud. How is it that Silk manages to reduce the total cost of ownership? What features and capabilities does it bring to these structured workloads that really provide that cost savings?
So we bring a number of capabilities. So not just are we aggregating the resources, the compute resources together to deliver extreme levels of performance, we're actually adding extra layers of capabilities within our software platform. So we're doing operations that would otherwise potentially have to be done within the database itself. We're automatically reducing the amount of capacity you need to store data for a database. We're compressing it, we're deduping it, we're sending copies of databases to other regions, other zones in that region to provide resiliency. We're automatically adding resiliency to the Google Cloud Platform to enable us to carry on running, even if there will be the unlikely occasion of an individual instance within a zone failing, we'll continue to run. So we like to think we're more available than the zone in which our customers are running in. And this can lead to significant reductions. We've seen environments that are reducing their overall cost by 30%, 50%, even larger amounts.
That's amazing. So in terms of performance, Tom, can you share any particular numbers? Like what's your throughput, your IOs per second that you can see on an average workload?
Absolutely. So the critical thing is around transactional latency. The lower transactional latency you can get out of the database, the more operations it can do in parallel and at the same time. And we can see within environments that will double the amount of database transactions in each second, in each minute, each hour, and that leads to happier end users. It leads to reports running. We've seen examples of very large database instances that are having like a 2.5 hour process completing in 2.5 hours on physical engineered hardware. They move it into the cloud on top of the Silk platform. It's completing in 20 minutes. We're seeing some very significant improvements.
Well, that's fantastic. And for our audience that's listening, right? These are hypercritical capabilities that exist in data centers today. Deduplication, compression, high throughput, low latency. Those are the conversations that you're always hearing database administrators having. Those are the challenging questions that they're always posing. And so if you're a database administrator and you're wondering, how am I going to take this database that I have? Tom's mentioned SQL, but I'm sure there's many other databases that are capable of running on Silk, right? This is how you do it. This is how you're going to migrate into Google Cloud and get that same sub-millisecond performance, deduplication, compression that is not native typically to cloud native solutions. So this is an extra layer of features and capabilities, which leads us, and you started touching on that as well, Tom, the business continuity component, right? You mentioned disaster recovery and replication. Explain what Silk does when it's managing data at that platform layer.
So we always deploy our customer environments so that you have a redundant solution. So not only are we adding resiliency within a given zone in a given region, we always recommend our customers to have a second copy of their database environments, as you would expect for these mission critical workloads, in another zone, another region, to enable them to continue functioning in the case of a disaster in a particular geographical area. And that can be achieved in a number of ways, whether you're using the database native capabilities to move copies of the data, or Silk itself and our platform can keep copies of the data in multiple zones up to date in several different zones at the same time. We can keep live copies of the same database, and you can instantly switch over from a region in Europe to a region in the US, for example.
That's really amazing, right? How does the performance or do the databases experience any sort of performance impact when Silk is managing the replication?
If Silk is doing the replication, we do everything we can to make sure that there's no impact to the replication. And for that reason, when Silk is doing the copies, you set the RPO and the RTO, and we always do it so that you get acknowledgement from the local zone first. So the secondary copy will always be slightly behind the primary copy. If you're doing it with database level replication, you have the option that the logs can be in asynchronous mode, which means that you only have to wait for the log data to be transmitted to a second location to be protected in the case of a failure. So we have many customers running in all sorts of different setups to get the matching level of availability and RPO and RTO that they need for the DR setup.
Well, it sounds like you can aggressively protect your data. If I'm not mistaken, Silk is basically managing that platform, right? That data plane where your data is living in. And so it gives you that capability to port your data to different regions, different zones at very aggressive RPOs and RTOs and be able to recover in those secondary sites, right? At the performance expectations that you had at your primary. Would that be correct?
Absolutely, and we can do so in ways that are different from the native capabilities of the database. So you could have an environment in Zone A in Europe, and it may have 50 database VMs running your production workload, and you can have them all replicating once every 30 minutes, once every minute, whatever you want to set up to another location. And while it's replicating to the second location, the Silk platform has to be available in that second location, but you don't need to start the remote copies of your database until such time as you want to fail over. So you can be agile and cost efficient in how you architect your solution and not keep the second copy of the instances running, which can be significant if you're looking at the database license cost.
Oh, that's phenomenal. What about, let's say you do encounter a scenario where there is a disaster and you have to fail over to your secondary site. You're going to run, but obviously you want to be running on your primary 99% of the time, right? What capabilities does Silk provide to fail back?
So we provide the ability to fail back in a very efficient way. So long as the primary zone comes back at some point, we can do just an incremental move of the data back if Silk is moving that data. So you can be very efficient in the amount of data that needs to move. And obviously we use our data reduction capabilities to minimize the data that needs to go across the link. So we actually have example use cases that have moved to Silk just because we can send more data more quickly because we do the data reduction, compression, if you like, before we send it over that link.
So that's phenomenal, right? Because if I understand the architecture and how you're driving it, a fail back is only going to be the changes between the time I recovered in my secondary site and the time I decide to go back to my primary. So that'll be, let's say, a change rate of maybe 20% if my databases are transacting that much. And what you're telling me is that you're going to take that 20% delta that happened in that time frame, and then because you're doing deduplication and compression, you're going to take just literally the most condensed component of data and send it back to my primary site for fail back.
That can absolutely be the case, depending, of course, on what the failure is on your primary site. If you've had a complete earthquake or something, then there may be more steps that need to be recovered, but we still compress the data before we send it over the link to reduce the amount of data that needs to move and the time it takes to move that data.
So when I'm back in my primary region, what I'm hearing is I don't need to copy all of my data back. Now, granted, you mentioned if there's an earthquake and the zone completely fell apart, which is out of everybody's control. Yes, you do have to migrate all the data. But if it was a zonal outage because of networking issues, capacity issues, and they're resolved and you're going to now fail back, that basically means that I'm only moving the data in line, right? I don't need to go create a net new database, a net new environment inside of Google Cloud to restore. And I think that's critical. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. You can build some very efficient architectures to match your customers' business requirements.
Again, this is where I get really excited, Tom, where I look at these technologies that provide that data platform, that data layer for databases, right? And that leads us to our third point where we were talking about the features and capabilities. You've already mentioned super advanced replication capabilities from one zone to the next. You've talked about deduplication and compression. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there's also a concept that you have of adaptive block size. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So we have this concept called adaptive block size, and really it's to enable you to run many different types of database, either within the same database instance or on the same Silk platform without them impacting each other. So we can simultaneously on the same environment supports running some very large report-based queries that might scan tens of terabytes, hundreds of terabytes of data, while still receiving very high rates of transactional requests, updates, queries, and you don't find them queuing one behind the other. And really, the value is all about responding to the customer request as quickly as possible, and whether that's an analytical report that needs to happen within 10 minutes, or it's 1,000 people on a website ordering pieces of furniture, which is something that happens on one of our favorite Google reference customers. And I guess the reassurance you get with Silk is that you know you're running on the fastest possible platform within Google Cloud, because we're built out of compute and we add resiliency to this data layer built out of compute. We give you the fastest possible response time, which means that you don't have to worry so much about the bits and the bytes, the speeds and the feeds. And we tend to always see physical environments that are moving to the cloud with Silk, or environments that are already running in Google. When they move onto Silk, they see a much better response to the application. They get faster feedback to their web portal that they're running, or the application front end, whatever their business is supporting.
That's fantastic. I mean, when you look at these advanced feature sets, right? For me, an adaptive block size is hypercritical. You mentioned running multiple databases. And again, this is going to be addressed to our listeners or viewers, right? Why does that make sense? Well, when you go look at a database, take Microsoft SQL, for example. The standard block size that Microsoft likes is a 64K block size. If you go look at others, it's between 8 blocks, 8K blocks. Some of them are running 16K blocks. I mean, it's a wide variety of block sizes. And the fact that you can have a platform that adapts to the block size that the database writes in natively is huge. It's huge. It provides you the capability to run it in its most optimal state. I mean, this for me is the power that a platform like Silk really, really brings to your back end. And I don't care where you're at, right? If you're running this in Google Cloud, which is where I want you to run this, right? In whatever region, you're going to get the same performance. So, Tom, I mean, why should customers be looking for Silk, and what databases should they be saying, hey, let me raise my hand. I've got a database here that I've been struggling to move into Google Cloud. Help us out.
So there are two types of scenario that we typically see. There are either customers that have like one or two, a small number of very large monster databases that support their entire business, and we can enable those to run in the fastest possible way. So we've got those large consolidation workloads, and we have customers that deploy multiple Silk pods to support a single database environment. But we also have customers that have larger numbers of more modest databases that need them to run in the most cost-efficient way. So we have customers that might want to have 10 medium-sized or 50 large data, or medium or small, all these different scenarios. And what we can do is put many different databases on a single Silk pod, and then get the benefit of that single Silk pod being able to support 500,000, 100,000, a million transactions a second from the database, from database A or database Z. So it can support many different databases running concurrently, and they can all, rather than having siloed levels of performance, they can all burst up to the performance of a single pod or multiple pods. So there are multiple use cases there. They're generally either around performance, scalability, cost efficiency, or increasing availability. So we either tend to get involved with customers in that migration phase when they're moving into the cloud and they want to be sure about the performance they can deliver, or they've already moved to the cloud and maybe they're seeing performance levels not as high as they're expecting, or they're seeing that their cloud bills are becoming too large. So we can help with all those scenarios.
That's fantastic. I mean, this is how we came across Silk, right? We had encountered a very unique scenario where a customer was struggling to move a database workload into Google Cloud. And once they were able to leverage the Silk data platform, it unlocked the workload, right? Completely. And that's why when we saw that, it was an instant value, because we know that this story is a story that a lot of customers are facing, not just the one where we met. It is across the industry. So what can you say, in terms of that? I mean, we're true believers. We're all in on Silk.
Well, a fantastic example, Fabian, as you know, is the reference customer that we've just in the process of moving into Google Cloud jointly with SADA in Fraser's Group here in the UK. They had an environment running across 2 physical data centers on premise on dedicated all-flash storage devices, dedicated hardware, many SQL databases, and it was just not cost efficient or feasible to move it natively because of the workloads, because of the capacities into Google Cloud. But they had an aggressive deadline because of the requirement to close data centers. So jointly, we were able to propose the solution that gave them the fastest possible performance and the ability to be sure that they wouldn't be losing out as they moved into the cloud. And it was a very simple migration route to get them into Google Cloud as quickly as possible.
That's fantastic. So it was one of the first opportunities that we had to collaborate. What has been your experience, and what has driven Silk to want to do more work with SADA?
So what's fantastic for Silk is that when we collaborate with SADA, you guys are able to assist the customer in all areas. What we're finding is more and more customers don't want to be involved in the actual moving of the data, the designing of the solutions to run in Google Cloud, or the making sure the security is correct, making sure the backups are correct. And what's fantastic with SADA is you can do all of those elements. So you can really deploy Silk more and more as a service and take the complexity away from the customer and make things simple and easy to consume more of the Silk platform.
That's fantastic. So we really appreciate this collaborative effort that we bring together, right? We know, like I said, we're true believers in this. I had this question planned up of where do you believe the industry is heading next? In my opinion, I really feel like Silk is actually setting the direction for where the industry needs to go. That I'm being biased, possibly, or maybe not. But what's your view, Tom? Being the amount of customers that you're seeing, the problems that you're helping resolve, and the management platform that you've provided to solve that.
So a key feature of our deployment technology is our ability to orchestrate the resources, orchestrate the Silk platform to optimize it for running databases fully automatically deployed directly from the marketplace in Google Cloud. And it really makes the deployment of the whole Silk system very straightforward and easy. But what we're finding is more and more customers are wanting to use us truly as a service, and whether that's as a service just for the Silk platform itself or as a service for the database and the Silk platform. So I think more and more people, even for these extreme enterprise workloads or the mission critical, business critical systems, are wanting to move more and more as a service, but without having to refactor, redesign, re-architect their solution to fit in with the current capabilities of the cloud. They want the agility of the cloud, they want the performance of the cloud, but they want it without changing how they do their business today. So I think that's the direction things are moving in. More and more the cloud vendors like Google Cloud are looking to be able to provide the capabilities that we can do today with Silk, but to support their as a service offerings.
Well, that's phenomenal, because what I'm hearing is you're making it extremely easy to consume, right? And purchase and transact, which means that you don't have to go outside of your Google Cloud commit. You don't have to go ask finance for more money to go do this, right? The vehicle that you're going to transact with is the Google Cloud Marketplace. It's straightforward. The second thing is the direction that they're heading in is this as a service model, which makes consumption of the tool even easier, more hands off, more performance results that you're going to get as a customer with less overhead, right? And then all of these rich features that you're going to be able to take advantage of. It just seems like a win-win situation. And I really love the fact that you're the one that's setting the direction to where everybody else is going to follow.
Yeah, it's a great position for us to be in at the moment, and yeah, I'm looking forward to what the future brings for Silk.
So am I. I mean, this is how you squeeze out every inch of performance in your environments, right? So, Tom, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I hope that we can do another one of these sessions. Maybe next time we start talking about actual customers and how they're moving it. We can go so many different directions. I'm very excited that you're a partner of ours, a customer of ours, and our commitment to really believing in what Silk brings to our customers, and for that fact, any customer on Google Cloud. So we look forward to continued partnership and bringing about more awareness of what Silk, the data platform, does for every customer.
Thank you, Fabian. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. Thank you.